From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Thursday in November to preview the Ravens Week 11 game against their divisional foe, the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to dive into this rivalry and this matchup. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Jonas, you picked the word of the day today. Rare change of pace. What'd you pick here?
I picked the word rivalrous.
What does that mean? I did not think that was a word when you put it in the Google Doc.
You know, you just take some swings in the dark, and sometimes words that might be words are indeed words. It, of course, comes from the word rivalry. It means having or marked by a strong desire to win or be better than others. I'm picking it not only because we got ourselves a Ravens Steelers humdinger of a rivalry game, but also
humdinger. Another would have been another good word of the day.
But also because rival Russ sounds a little bit like rival Russ, as in Russell Wilson, as in Mr. Unlimited. First known use 1810s, and we've got ourselves a big game for a big rivalry. Just looking back over the years, it's hard to find a game this late in the season with these two teams as well regarded as they are right now. Like, we've had really good Ravens teams go up against kind of mediocre Steelers teams. We've had, good Steelers teams go up against good Ravens teams. But you look back at like maybe 2020, 6-0 Steelers, 5-1 Ravens in Baltimore. But even that was like a COVID season game with just a couple thousand fans in the stands. So this is a really, really fun game to talk about.
Yeah, we got a 7-3 team and a 7-2 team. The Ravens lose this game. They're a game and a half back in the AFC North. The Ravens win this game. They take control of the AFC North. It's so fun when these games actually mean something and matter. And this is especially important because this is one of Lamar Jackson's few opportunities to beat a team that has had his number, in the same way that the Ravens have had Joe Burrow's number. The Steelers have had Lamar Jackson's number, albeit in a very small sample size, because he's had to miss some games over the course of several years. But he's 1-3 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 17-5 against the other AFC North teams. So it is really only the Steelers that are his bugaboo. But I think that a lot of Ravens fans would point back to the fact that the Steelers have, I wouldn't say dominated, but they've had the better of the Ravens in this rivalry in recent years. And you can point to a lot of exceptions. Lamar missing games, the COVID game, the fact that last year they played in week 18 in a game Lamar didn't play in because none of the starters were playing in, essentially. But the Ravens lost both their games to the Steelers last year by the same score, 17-10. And they lost their final game against the Steelers in 2022. So their last win against the Steelers came in December of 2022. And so this is a fascinating matchup, especially to see if Lamar can finally not get the monkey off his back, because he does have that one win, but rack up another win, try to get closer to 500 against his divisional rival.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anything kind of explains just the oddity of Lamar versus the Steelers more than his game, against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh last year, where he finishes the week as PFF's highest graded quarterback, but loses. That is very, very hard to do. But he had, I think, 6 drop passes.
Yes.
There was the weird snap from Tyler Linderbaum where I think he thought the Steelers were outside, but they weren't, and that play goes nowhere. You have the blocked punt. It's been a kind of weird. It's been kind of difficult to frame this as Lamar versus the Steelers because of how everything has unfolded for Lamar, over his career. You just look back at his history against this rival. Didn't start either game in 2018. 2019, he won the start in Pittsburgh in overtime, but that was a game where Earl Thomas knocked out Mason Rudolph, and Pittsburgh had to put in Duck Hodges. 2019 finale, again, another game where they didn't need him, so he rested. 2020, the Ravens go up, like we talked about, 17-7 at halftime, and then they lose that undefeated Steelers team. Next game in 2020, misses that game because of COVID. That was when things got really, really bad for the Ravens. 2021, they were really hanging in there in Pittsburgh, leading 10-3 entering the fourth quarter. The Steelers score 17 points. Lamar has the late touchdown, but misses on that 2-point conversion to Mark Andrews that would have tied the game. They end up losing in regulation. He then misses the second game against Pittsburgh, the home finale, with an ankle injury. 2022 misses both those games because they happened week 14, week 17 because of that PCL injury. And then 2023, that was the drop pass game. And then obviously he didn't have to play the regular season finale in Baltimore last year because they already had the 1 seed wrapped up. So Lamar has not been good against the Steelers when he's played, just looking at it over the course of the season, over the course of his career, rather. But it's been a very, very strange thing where you wonder if he'd played more games, if this sample size were bigger, would we see a regression to the mean in a positive way?
Yeah, and this is much more than just about Lamar Jackson. It's about two great coaches, two of the longest tenured coaches in the NFL, who are playing a little bit of games through the media, I think you could say. Both these guys are very aware of how their comments are taken and interpreted. And John Harbaugh yesterday was pretty curt, pretty tight 5-minute press conference. Was pretty tight-lipped about everything. And we also heard some interesting comments from Mike Tomlin about one of his former players, who we'll get into. But it's also about the return of Patrick Queen against his former team. Not coming to Baltimore because this game is in Pittsburgh. But Patrick Queen is still, I think it's pretty clear based on the video that we saw of him talking to Pittsburgh media, still a little bit salty about how things shook out at the end of his Ravens tenure. Of course, first-round draft pick by the Baltimore Ravens. Starts out his career in Baltimore not so great. Roquan Smith comes. He turns into an above-average inside linebacker. Ravens decline his fifth-year option. They, according to him, do not offer him a contract in this past offseason when he hits free agency. He signs a 3-year, $41 million contract with the Steelers. And Jonas, I've been listening to a lot of Sabrina Carpenter recently, and this made me think of the song Sharpest Tool with the lyrics, "We never talk about it. All the silence just makes it worse, really, because it leaves you so top of mind for me. All the silence is just your strategy." The silence that Patrick Queen got from the Ravens front office. He said he hasn't talked to Harbaugh. He hasn't talked to Eric DeCosta. It took him until August, September, he told the media, to really get over it. From the media's perspective, the writing was on the wall. When they decline his fifth-year option and they draft Trenton Simpson in the third round and they pay Roquan Smith $100 million, there was no way they were ever going to pay two inside linebackers upwards of $140 million. That's too much to commit to one position. They clearly trusted their ability to draft at that position by taking Trenton Simpson, and them declining the fifth-year option was a clear indication that they were ready to see him walk in free agency. Was Patrick Queen the last person to find out that the Ravens were not interested in bringing him back?
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, because I don't know if Patrick, who we loved talking to in Baltimore, just a guy who wears his emotions on his sleeves. I think this Ravens locker room selfishly needs more of those guys, because some of these days in the locker room are just pretty bare bones in terms of what we're getting. But do you want a courtesy offer where it's like well below your market value just so that you can say that the Ravens did offer you? But then if you get that courtesy offer and it's insultingly low, then you're going to have that bone to pick. So, I think he's known, as you said, basically as soon as Roquan got signed, as soon as Trent Simpson got drafted, that this was going to be it for him. But these are athletes. They're built different than you or I, and they're going to use whatever is in kind of rattling around in that headspace to motivate them for a game like this. So obviously it didn't motivate him to have that great of a start of the season in Pittsburgh, because his PFF grades first couple of games were not especially green, not especially high, but he's turned things around. He's playing probably the best ball of his Steelers tenure so far, and they're going to need it because Lamar is great. Lamar is fast. Derrick Henry is big. Derrick Henry is fast. And that they've really made him like the centerpiece linebacker in that defense as they kind of, tone down some of their usage of their rookie Peyton Wilson.
Even as he has been playing better, his PFF grade is 72nd. He's the 72nd ranked inside linebacker, but Roquan Smith is only 10 spots ahead of him at 62nd. So maybe they're like Lennon and McCartney and they just needed each other side by side. They both would be better together.
So
I mean,
they're
remember,
like,
Roquan wasn't a distressed asset, but he was not viewed as highly when the Bears traded him to the Ravens.
yeah, I was trying to think of a more contemporary allusion, like, so it's like Justin Timberlake and who's another Backstreet Boy. But
Howie,
then I
I don't know.
realized that Justin Timberlake obviously had a successful
He was
solo career.
Justin Timberlake's In Sync, not Backstreet Boys.
Oh, very
Come on. All right, another player facing his former team on the other sideline, Diontae Johnson, who has gotten off to quite a slow start in Baltimore since he was traded by the Carolina Panthers. He spent 5 years in Pittsburgh before he was traded around draft time to Carolina. His only catch so far, Jonas, with the Ravens, came with 13 seconds left in the first half of their win over the Cincinnati Bengals. And he tried to cut up field instead of running straight out of bounds when the Ravens were out of timeouts, gets tackled inbounds, clock runs out, maybe prevents the Ravens from attempting one more Hail Mary. So it has been all lowlights of him tripping and falling, and a low light. His only highlight of him making a catch ended in the Ravens not being able to take another opportunity at the end zone. So not a great start, but he has, said the right things. He said about going up against the Steelers, quote, "I've had a great career there. I loved it. Great city, people there, great people there. I know what they're about. I can't wait for Sunday to be back in that stadium." So he clearly enjoyed his time in Pittsburgh, or at least is indicating that he did. Mike Tomlin has been a little bit shady about it, telling the Pittsburgh media he's not on a lot of their video. They have more significant pieces with larger roles to worry about at this point in the week. I'd agree with that.
Yeah, fact check. True.
Yeah, Diontae Johnson is not a large piece of the Ravens' game plan, and he shouldn't be, because he came midseason when the offense was already humming, when they already had Zay Flowers near the top of the league in receiving yards, Rashad Bateman coming along, Mark Andrews picking up his production. They have too many mouths to feed to be worried about feeding the ball to Diontae Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an adjustment for him if it hasn't been already, because he's going from being target one, wide receiver one in Carolina to a obviously much more explosive and better offense in Baltimore. But he's behind Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman in the wide receiver pecking order. He's behind Mark Andrews in just the overall target pecking order. If you're not a better route runner than the top two wide receivers, and you're not a better blocker than the top two blocking wide receivers, which in this case I think would be Nelson Aguilar or Tylan Wallace, then it's going to be tough for you to carve out a role, at least early in the process. I think obviously, if the Ravens go to more 11 personnel, if they spread things out, certainly if one of those guys gets hurt, then that is what Diontae Johnson is for. He is the ultimate insurance policy. Maybe he could be more than an insurance policy if he shows himself to be a guy who just has this instant chemistry with Lamar. But it's the most damning insults, if you want to call it that, are the ones that are the most factually true, and they have more significant pieces with larger roles to worry about, which Mike Tomlin said is 100% correct. So it would be great from a narrative standpoint if he pops off and has a great game. It would be terrible for the Ravens if they just spiral uncontrollably in this game, and you got Diontae Johnson causing a ruckus on the sideline. So it's a they're in a kind of interesting spot with him, because I think we maybe expected him to have more of an immediate impact. That hasn't really been the case, but they haven't really needed him to be a superstar yet. So, I think Lamar had a pretty fair quote about him when he was asked about not really rocking the boat after you bring in a wide receiver like him. He said, "You don't want to rush things. If it ain't broke, don't fix it."
Yep.
That's probably how the coaches are feeling, but we definitely want to get him involved because he's a great talent. So I don't know if we'll see some, kind of ginned up targets for Diontae just to, basically feed that beast. I don't think you want to do that, but
No.
It's going to be an interesting game, because obviously he's going to feel the full weight of the terrible Tal Army when he goes to Pittsburgh.
I just wonder how things ended at the end of his Steelers tenure, because he was an early draft pick by them, but they did extend him as well. I mean, they gave him a 2-year contract before they traded him. So they clearly liked him enough to bring him back, but then they ended up trading him kind of for pennies on the dollar to Carolina. So clearly things didn't end perfectly for him there. You wonder where the acrimony lies, if it's on the Pittsburgh side or Diontae's side. And it seems right now like it's on Pittsburgh side, based on the kind of tone of Mike Tomlin's comments.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked to Diontae on Tuesday, he was rattling off all the guys in that Pittsburgh locker room that he's still cool with. So there's obviously still a fraternity there with some of those Steelers guys, but maybe some hard feelings with how things ended there in Pittsburgh. Seemed like a guy who, because of how he started his career, could have been just a Steelers lifer.
Yeah,
a guy who was a thorn in the Ravens side time after time after time, but it just didn't work out. And it didn't work out in Carolina, and we'll see if it works out in Baltimore.
And then one more guy we should talk about, Deshaun Elliott, who felt like dragging even another team into this beef by talking about his former team in the Miami Dolphins.
I know. I've never seen a anonymous safety make more headlines than Deshaun Elliott did yesterday.
Do you think that we're going to get more reaction to our podcast than Marlon Humphrey did to his podcast where he had Deshaun Elliott on?
I don't think we're going to have anything that we're saying here that's going to provoke questions to Mike McDaniel about the culture and whether it's tough to build a winning culture in Miami because of all strip clubs in the city limits.
Get Daniel Oyefusi back on, and maybe we could. So Deshaun Elliott came in with Lamar in 2018. Good friends with Marlon Humphrey, clearly, to go on his podcast. But he also had some interesting comments about Marcus Williams as well.
Yeah, I think it rubbed a lot of Ravens fans the wrong way because he was joking that, Marlon joked that Deshaun Elliott for leaving Baltimore, although there wasn't really a whole lot of reason to re-sign Deshaun Elliott because he hadn't really shown a whole lot, had been pretty injury prone. He joked that Deshaun was a full-blown traitor, and Deshaun Elliott told him, I wouldn't say traitor because Eric DeCosta had a chance to sign me back, and he chose not to. He chose to sign number 32, meaning Marcus Williams. Mm-hmm. And you see Marlon Humphrey and Jack Settleman, the co-hosts, both laugh at that. And obviously the optics on that were not great, even though I don't think they were laughing at Marcus Williams. They were just saying that this thing could have happened, and instead this thing, which is the exact opposite of it, happened. I mean, like Deshaun Elliott signed for pennies. Marcus Williams got one of the biggest deals in the NFL when he signed with the Ravens. So it's not like it was a totally shocking development. The Ravens needed a safety. They went and got a safety. But we're in a weird spot now with the Ravens and their locker room and their secondary. And if I'm Marlon Humphrey, or if I'm John Harbaugh, or if I'm Chris Hewitt, in charge of that, if I'm in charge of that secondary group, I don't want anything that could potentially destabilize this group even more, and that includes podcasts.
Right. But also, if you are looking for bulletin board material, like you mentioned, Patrick Queen might be. If you're Marcus Williams, there's some bulletin board material. Maybe he should direct it less towards his teammate and Marlon Humphrey, more towards the opponent. But if there is a reason to light a fire under Marcus Williams behind, and there should be a million reasons this year, there is yet another one. All right, let's get into this matchup, and let's talk about the injuries that both of these teams come in with. The biggest one, of course, on the Ravens side is Kyle Hamilton. Did not participate Wednesday, but you saw him running around with a trainer as he deals with that ankle injury that he suffered against the Cincinnati Bengals, which looked to be terrible at the time, but doesn't seem to nearly have garnered as much grave concerns as initially feared.
Yeah, it's tough to prognosticate based on just a couple back and forth that he did on Wednesday, whether he's going to be a possibility for Sunday. Wasn't running at full strength, wasn't really having to run and cut, which is really what you really worry about with the flexion of that ankle. Obviously, John Harbaugh didn't have much of an update on Monday, didn't have much of an update on Wednesday. So
didn't say much in general.
Still TBD on that front. Obviously, if the Ravens hold him out this weekend because he's just not ready to go, they do have that extra day next week to get him ready for Monday Night Football. So maybe that is a consideration in both ways. Like if he does play, then he does have another day of rest. And if he doesn't play, then he'll also have another day of rest. No surprise that this offense, both last year and on Thursday, was much better with Kyle Hamilton on the field than when he was off the field. They were, I think, allowing like 4.7 yards per play when he was on the field, which is really, really good. And I think that jumped to like 8 yards per play allowed when he was off the field, which is really, really bad. So they need him, but also I think, as we'll talk about, maybe this isn't the game where you really worry about his absence in the passing game.
Yeah, it's also just a weird season defensively because you're seeing a great season from Marlon Humphrey and a solid season. Kyle Hamilton didn't take the kind of leap that maybe we expected, talking about him for a defensive preseason defensive player of the year. But that's also because this defense overall has been bad. But the secondary in general has been really bad. And yet we're seeing a great return to form season from Marlon Humphrey and a solid season from Kyle Hamilton. And still they're this bad. So you want them on the field, obviously.
Yep.
A couple other injuries to talk about. Kyle Van Noy missed Wednesday with an illness. Isaiah Likely, hamstring, back as limited participant after he missed that Bengals game. And Brent Urban suffered a concussion a few weeks ago, is back in practice after missing 2 games. And on the other sideline, Najee Harris, who suffered an ankle injury against the Commanders, was not a non-participant as well. And they have already ruled out outside linebacker Alex Highsmith because of an ankle injury he suffered against the Commanders.
Big loss. He was the Robin to Pittsburgh's Batman with Watt there. So he's a good run defender, obviously a great pass rusher. I think he was the guy who I believe had the forced fumble in that game in Pittsburgh last year that kind of wrapped things up. So obviously you trust Ronnie Stanley a whole heck of a lot more on that left side against Highsmith. But Steelers have good depth. I mean, Nick Herbig is one heck of a guy to bring in, assuming that he is indeed full strength and good to go. So Alex Highsmith not playing could be a potentially decisive factor because of just how good he is in so many different facets of this game. But again, the Steelers have a really, really impressive depth there, and maybe it just becomes a minor loss instead of a major loss.
Yeah, Herbig back for the first time in a month, and will definitely add to that depth on the pretty vaunted, pretty scary Steelers defensive line. This game is being played in Pittsburgh at, I'm still calling it Heinz Field, Acrisure, whatever it is. And it is being played at 1 o'clock. Ravens are favored by 3 points. The over-under is 48. It's obviously an important game for the divisional standings, as mentioned. And this is also an interesting game because it's a tale of 2 very, very different football teams and how they are constructed right now. Pittsburgh, 12th in points per game. Ravens are first. So Steelers are middle of the pack in terms of offense. Steelers defense, vaunted as ever. 2nd in points per game allowed. The Ravens, 25th. Steelers are 28th in passing yards per game. The Ravens are first. The only similarity that you can find between these two teams is that they are both great against the run. Pittsburgh is 4th in rushing yards per game allowed. The Ravens are first. So a very good defense and mediocre offense against a team that has a horrific defense and an outstanding offense.
Yeah, it's a fun matchup. I think you look at how this game could potentially affect the rest of the season. I think the Ravens, if you look at some of the odds and the kind of the schedule makers, what their predictions are, they are still, I believe, pretty heavily favored, or at least moderately favored to win the AFC North. Part of that is just because I think the analytic models favor this Ravens team in general over Pittsburgh, and then you also just look at what these teams have coming up. I mean, I think the Ravens, obviously, on the day that they go to face a Texans team that we now probably think less of because of some of their injuries, although Nico Collins should be back at that point. The Steelers have to go to Kansas City, or they have to play Kansas City. I think they have the Eagles coming up. They have to play the rest of their AFC North schedule. So they have a very, very difficult remaining schedule. And I think if the Ravens can win this game, take care of the rest of their schedule, which is not easy by any means, but I think definitely more manageable than Pittsburgh, then they'll continue to have that inner path, that inner track to take the AFC North and get that top 4 seed.
And it all starts at quarterback when it's talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers because of the weirdness that has taken over that position this season. They bring in both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in the offseason. Russell Wilson was on track to start week 1. He gets hurt. Justin Fields starts. He leads them to a 4-2 record, seems to be playing under control, not turning the ball over, running a good amount, not lighting things up through the air, but obviously winning ball games. Russell Wilson's healthy enough to come back. Mike Tomlin reinserts Russell Wilson into the starting spot. Everybody in the media, starts going crazy. Turns out Mike Tomlin still knows what he's doing. Russell Wilson is 3-0 with the Steelers. Low completion percentage, under 60%, but he's got 6 touchdowns and just 1 interception, and he's throwing for 246 yards a game, which would be his highest mark since 2020. Are you buying the Russ resurgence, Jonas? And do you think that he is back to his Steelers heights? Do you think that he is just a tick better than his Broncos days? Or do you think this is just small sample size and he's going to fall back down to earth?
I don't know. This is kind of a weird offense because you mentioned like buying this resurgence, but for a resurgent offense or resurgent Russ, they're really not passing all that much.
Resurgence. Yeah.
Resurgence.
Danger Russ. Yeah.
They are 30th in the NFL in early down pass rate, which tells me that they would rather keep the ball out of Russ's hands. You know what I mean? Like, obviously,
I mean, that's how Mike Tomlin runs his teams typically. And also with Arthur Smith, their new offensive coordinator.
I know, but like,
guy.
They don't have an overpowering run game though,
Right.
and we've seen them be explosive downfield. Their success rate is low since Russ came over, but they haven't even really been all that explosive on a per play basis. But they've just got, when they have hit, they've hit big, and I think that has been the biggest thing. And you wonder how much variance is involved with that, and you wonder if they are due for a regression against the Ravens, or in fact they are bound to continue because it is the Ravens, and
Right.
the Ravens can't do anything to stop that passes downfield. Russ is 5 for 10 on passes of 30 plus air yards in just 3 games. Lamar has attempted 14 passes of 30 plus air yards over this entire season. So Russ, when he is dropping back to pass, he is looking to just huck that thing downfield. He's got 18 expected points added on throws of 20 plus air yards in the 3 games this season. That's more than Josh Allen has the entire year on those deep shots. So, like I said, they kind of know where their bread is buttered, even if they don't really go for the bread as much as you might think that they would.
You can't fill up on bread.
But I guess what I'm optimistic about for the Ravens in this case is when they are dropping back to pass, it is just those moon balls down the left sideline, down the right sideline. You like Marlon Humphrey and what he's shown. You like Nate Wiggins at least being able to stay attached. You know, you wonder a little bit about Brandon Stevens and where his confidence level is at this point, but he still has been, you know, a little bit unlucky at times and being close to the wide receiver and just not finding a way to break it up. And Russ is not really a guy at this point in his career who's looking to throw over the middle. And when he does, he hasn't been very accurate. You know, 63% completion percentage on throws between the numbers that are not screens this year. That's 8%. That's 8 percentage points below the league average. So for all we've talked about, you know, Trenton Simpson having issues in coverage, Marcus Williams having issues in coverage, Roquan Smith getting issues in coverage, there's not really a lot either personnel-wise or accuracy-wise that I think would threaten the Ravens like a typical passing offense. So it just comes down to, can they, you know, defend the run early? And we think they can, because that's what they've been able to do all year. And then are they going to get enough luck against this rejuvenated passing game for Pittsburgh, where maybe Russ throws a couple bad passes, maybe he just, you know, the Ravens are able to knock these guys off the route because of how physical they are, and they you know, turn some of these drives into 3 and outs, and that gets the Ravens offense going.
Yeah, and like you said, the run game for the Steelers has not been as consistent as it has been in previous seasons. Jaylen Warren, if he does start this game with Najee Harris potentially being sidelined, only 3.9 yards per carry after 5.3 last year. Najee Harris has been more effective and more efficient, but it has not been the best rushing offense in the league by any stretch. The concern still lies in George Pickens, because whether it's on the sideline, whether it's over the middle of the field, he is still one of the better receivers in the NFL. And the concern is that Russell Wilson has re-unlocked him. Since Russ came over, George Pickens did not have a single touchdown through the first 6 weeks of the season when Justin Fields was starting. He has 2 since then. In the 3 games with Russell Wilson, 92 receiving yards per game, 4th in the NFL in yards per route run since Russ was named the starter. And as we may remember, he caught that game-winning touchdown over Marlon Humphrey on single coverage last year when these 2 teams met. So the concern there is that you are facing yet another elite wide receiver. And all the talk last week when we were talking about that Bengals game, we were saying, well, if T. Higgins isn't playing, the Bengals offense suffers significantly when they only have one of those 2-star wide receivers. Well, turns out they can churn out a great game even if they just have Jamar Chase out there, because T. Higgins didn't play and Jamar Chase went for over 200 yards. So all you really need is one elite wide receiver to light up this Ravens unit. They have a pretty elite wide receiver in George Pickens.
Yeah, and I was looking this up last night. It will not shock you, nor will it astound you to learn that according to FTN, the Ravens are the worst pass defense in the NFL against wide receiver ones.
I'm both shocked and astounded.
They are giving up over 100 yards per game to teams' top wide receivers. And I think Jamar Chase probably accounts for about 50% of that. But You think back to what Diontae Adams did.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, that's what also concerns me. You talk about the middle of the field. That's definitely the area of concern. Remember, Diontae Adams beat them along the sideline in week 2. I know that was a while ago, but there were a lot of plays that Brandon Stephens just didn't get his head around, didn't get his arms in the right spot, and Diontae Adams was making tiptoe catches along the sideline.
Yeah, and that's why I'm wondering, with the Ravens bringing in Tre'Davious White, with Jalen Armour-Davis hopefully getting healthier. TJ Tampa, I don't think he's that close to playing time because of all the injuries that he's been through. Then are we approaching a possible last chance saloon for Brandon Stephens? If the Steelers just park George Pickens on the left side of that offense, which is where Brandon Stephens is going to line up exclusively, and just run route after route after route on that side, and Brandon Stephens can't cover him like he couldn't cover Jamar Chase, like he couldn't cover Diontae Adams. At a certain point, you gotta pull that plug and figure out what exactly there is to do with Brandon Stephens. So it's gonna be interesting. I think talking to Arthur Maulet on Tuesday, who obviously played in Pittsburgh for a couple of years, called George Pickens an alien. I think probably my favorite fun fact about George Pickens is that for all these incredible catches that we've seen, you expect him to have these like DeAndre Hopkins type mitts where it's just huge hands. 9th percentile hands for a wide receiver prospect. Does not have big hands, and yet he comes up with these unbelievable one-handed grabs.
It's not quite Kenny Pickett territory, but
no, but he's not throwing the ball. So again, it's going to be moonball after moonball. We think if you wonder, will the Ravens, because they need to heat up Russ? He has not been good under pressure, but if you give up some of those guys to blitz Russ, then obviously you're probably you don't have much flexibility with dropping 2 safeties back and saying, we dare you to throw to the, this side of the field with the safety playing on the deep half. So it's going to be a very interesting, I think, game plan decision for Zach Orr about how you go about defending this guy while also accounting for the need to get in Russ's face.
If they do pull the plug on Brandon Stephens, like they tried to do with Marcus Williams, inserting Eddie Jackson in there, and then they pulled the plug again on Eddie Jackson and went back to Marcus Williams. They try that with Brandon Stephens. Are we talking Tre'Davious White time? I mean, who's the next logical replacement?
I mean, the tricky thing is that I guess I don't know enough about how much technique matters on a particular side of the field. Like, Marlon Humphrey obviously has played outside cornerback, but when he's played outside cornerback, it's been on the other side of the field.
Right.
So I don't know if there is any. Would there be any kind of creakiness in changing sides to be on Brandon Stephens' side? Do you worry about his ability to kind of communicate on that side of the field? Probably not. But I think you probably have Nate Wiggins as one side cornerback, Marlon Humphrey on the other, and then you could put Darius Washington in the slot, and then go with Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson at safety. So you were kind of robbing from Peter to pay Paul in that scenario, because you just don't have Brandon Stephens on the field at all. And according to John Harbaugh, they're not considering moving him to safety. Maybe you move Brandon Stephens back in the slot, which is where he has some experience. But again, I don't know if that would be such a great decision, considering he just hasn't played a whole lot there.
It's just so late in the season to be making these kind of changes. Yeah. That's the frustrating
I can't get here
part.
soon enough.
No. All right. On the other side of the ball, Ravens offense has not been stymied really all season. I mean, I can't point to a single game this season where they've had a bad day. The worst day, I think you could say, was their loss against the Cleveland Browns, and still they put up 24 points. This is still perhaps the biggest opportunity for an opponent to shut down their offense. I don't think they could ever be entirely shut down, but this is perhaps could be their lowest scoring output of the season, because the Steelers come in 10th in DVOA, 10th against the pass, 9th against the rush. And that defensive line is going to give this Ravens young offensive line a lot of trouble. Even without Alex Highsmith, they still have Nick Herbig. They still have TJ frickin' Watt. They still have Cam Hayward, who are all in the top 6 at their positions, according to PFF. Roger Rosengarten is going to have his hands full at right tackle. This could be a long day for him, for Daniel Falele. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, and this is a Steelers group that's 5th in pass rush win rate. I actually don't think they have fewer sacks than the Ravens do, which is kind of interesting. So maybe not the best at converting those pressures into sacks, but yeah, it's a group that I think you look back at what Cincinnati was able to do last Thursday, where they were just kind of mush rushing Lamar and knocking him off his spots. And I think if that kind of philosophy carries over and the Ravens don't have those immediate wins downfield, and Lamar is again left to scramble and make plays after 3 seconds or 4 seconds, after 5 seconds. Can it be as sustainable as it was last week? Because it's one thing to be worried about Trey Hendrickson. It's another when it's TJ Watt and Cam Hayward pushing the pocket, and Keanu Benton pushing the pocket, and Herbig coming after the Ravens on the other side. And I think if the Ravens feel like they can make something out of nothing time and time again because they're just not getting the ball out quickly, or they're not getting open downfield, then I think we're probably going to see a lot more 3 and outs. I think we could see potentially a repeat of what we did against Cincinnati on Thursday.
It's crazy to say, but is there any concern here with this run game right now? Because the designed runs have not been particularly effective in the last few weeks for the Ravens. It's running between the tackles. We've talked about how that pitch play to Derrick Henry has been money so far this season. I'm not sure that's going to work when you have guys who are as quick side to side as TJ Watt, who are going to be basically going sideline to sideline and can snuff those out. Are you worried at all about the designed runs? I also do think that this is maybe a case of Derrick Henry getting better as the season goes along, getting better as games go along, because a lot of times I feel like you see Derrick Henry go for 1, 2, 5 yards to start the game, and then by the fourth quarter, he's worn down the defense so much that he's ripping off 40-yarders.
Yeah, I mean, just 4 yards per carry on design runs over the last 3 weeks, less than a yard before contact, so they're not really getting a whole lot of push. I think you certainly saw that against Cincinnati, and this is a really good Steelers run defense, like it seemingly is every year. I mean, 4th in the NFL in yards per carry allowed, 3.8, top 10 in average yards before contact. We know that they are gettable. You look at that Steelers-Giants game where the Steelers really could not do anything in the red zone, and that's obviously something we probably should have mentioned. The Steelers are not good at actually converting those drives inside the 20 into touchdowns. Meanwhile, the Ravens are the best in the league. Tyrone Tracy, 2 explosive runs, 2 runs of 25 plus yards against the Giants, and obviously Daniel Jones has some run threat, but that is not a good New York offensive line, and they still had pretty good success against the Steelers. So I think the Ravens have to find a way to keep this Steelers defense on its toes on early downs. You can't just be expecting Lamar to drop back 50 times and win this game for you, although he certainly can. And it's even more troubling because if you expect, oh well, Lamar can just make something happen, this is also a really good Steelers defense against quarterback runs. Like they've allowed 15 yards total on scrambles this year.
That's nuts.
And they're allowing just 4.7 yards per carry to quarterbacks on design runs. They gave up just the 5 yards to Jaden Daniels, who obviously was one of the NFL's best running quarterbacks until that game last week. 18 yards to Bo Nix, 24 yards to Anthony Richardson. So this is a fast defense. It's a disciplined defense, ferocious defense, and Lamar is special, but I don't know if this is going to be a game where you can reasonably expect him to get 60, 70 yards on the ground.
Yeah. Finally, special teams. Don't usually spend a whole lot of time talking about the special teams, but this is a fascinating matchup because the Steelers are 3rd in DVOA for special teams, and the Ravens are 19th. Special teams coordinator Danny Smith is an absolute madman. He's been there since 2013, and he's gained a lot of attention recently for going crazy on the sidelines. Also, coming up with some absolutely mind-blowing fake punts, fake everything. They did try a fake punt last week that failed, I believe.
Yeah, dropped the ball.
So that's sometimes the trade-off that you get with him. But this is going to be an interesting matchup special teams wise because this is one of the rare seasons where the Ravens do not have elite special teams.
Yeah, and it's funny to think back last year when the Ravens did have that blocked punt that got turned into a safety. That was basically the spark for that Steelers team. I think that the Ravens were up 10-3 at that point, and then it was 10-5, and I think the Steelers kicked a field goal, and they slowly started working their way back into that game until they finally took the lead. And I think that was kind of the low point for the Ravens special teams last year. If you remember, they also started the year really, really slowly. Obviously, that game happened much earlier in the schedule than this one is happening. So maybe this is a potential inflection point for the Ravens. There's not really been a unit on this special teams like we talked about that has been consistently excellent. You've got Justin Tucker now missing extra points. You've got to worry about every manner of this Ravens special teams, and Pittsburgh does a good job of just getting guys open for punt blocks and punt block opportunities and field goal block opportunities. And If this game comes down to the 3 points that the Vegas odds makers are expecting it to, you can't leave any points on the board. And it's time that this group kind of show up, and Chris Horton getting this group to the standards that John Harbaugh sets for them every year.
Too many Chris's on this Ravens coaching staff. Speaking of the point differential, what is your prediction for the final score of this game, Jonas?
I've got 27-24 Ravens. I just think it's, Lamar showed last year, even in defeat, that this isn't really a Steelers defense that is kryptonite for him. I mean, he played well. He just did not get any help at all from his receivers or from his supporting cast.
It was like a comedy of errors in terms.
I mean, like, to be fair to Lamar, to be fair to the rest of the guys, Lamar did have some bad plays there, and he threw that kind of hopeless red zone interception to Joey Porter Jr.
Yeah.
He had the fumble, the strip sack when he was trying to make something happen there near the end. But I just feel like the Ravens' ability to do anything on offense, this is a Pittsburgh defense that has been very good, but has not really seen a whole lot of elite quarterback play. I mean, you look at their early season schedule, it's just tomato can after tomato can. I mean, that was like their first game was against Kirk Cousins, who could not run a single play action play because of his Achilles. And predictably, they were very, very easy to defend. And it felt like it's been that every other week for the Steelers defense. So I think the Ravens have enough talent. I think their little mini bye with the Thursday night game will help. And I just feel like they are in a good place right now. Not a good place. They're in a better place because of how Russ wants to attack downfield, that they don't feel they probably won't be super threatened over the middle of the field. I think, you just hope and pray that if you're a Ravens fan, that there's enough positive things coming out of this break for Brandon Stevens and Nate Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey, that those go balls that have been, 40, 50-yard plays for the Steelers are not as impactful, and that those are potential drive vendors, and that the Ravens get the ball back and, are able to kind of march downfield and shut up that Steelers crowd. So nothing would surprise me about this game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens run away with this. I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers win by double digits, but I just feel like the Ravens right now, considering where they are injury-wise, considering Highsmith missing, considering I'm not still totally bought in on the Russ experience, are going to pull this out.
I have the Ravens losing this game, and that's going to come to the angst of a lot of our YouTube or Apple podcast reviewers. By the way, write us a podcast review. Give us 5 stars, and I'll read it out here in the show. Because they like when they pick the Ravens. They don't like when we don't pick the Ravens. But I'm coming at this from the mindset of these AFC North games are weird.
Unpredictable.
They're completely unpredictable. I have the Ravens losing a 1-point game the week after they win a 1-point game. 24-23. I have the Steelers coming out on top. But like I said, I don't know how to feel about this game. I really don't. The fact that the red zone offense has been struggling as much for the Steelers does give me hope, because that's one area where I feel like the Ravens could maybe have an upper hand. But if they're going to be giving up go balls and Russ is going to be dropping it in the bucket to George Pickens like Joe Burrow did to Jamar Chase last week, they're going to be in trouble. There have been a lot of coin flip games for this Ravens team recently, and this might be one where they just come out on the wrong side because of the, maybe the kicking game not being as up to snuff. We saw that extra point missed last week that didn't end up coming back to haunt the Ravens, but very much could have. So I think it's going to be a close game, but who really knows? We'll be writing our official predictions on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months to read all of Jonas's great work and Kyle's great work and Gianna Hahn's great work. But this is going to be a fun game, and you're going to be out in Pittsburgh potentially getting some sandwiches with fries on top. I think that's one of their staples.
Primanti Brothers.
Primanti Brothers. Yeah. Isn't that a thing?
Yeah. I don't mind it. Have you ever had a sandwich with potato chips on it?
No. You eat the sandwich and you have potato chips on the side. Why do we have to put it all together?
I don't. As a kid, I had like peanut butter sandwiches with chips and sometimes cheese in it, and it was a nice treat.
And you grew up to be a tall, strong boy. Yeah. So maybe I was
no osteoporosis,
none whatsoever. The kids that always came to school with fluffernutters, I was just so jealous of.
Oh my god!
What parent would let their kid go to school with a fluffernutter?
I was always like disdainful of the parents who would give, maybe you're one of them, but the parents who would give their kids what was like the chocolate sauce that you could put on sandwiches?
The spreadable, yes. Oh, well, not Nutella.
Nutella.
Okay, yeah.
Like why why are you giving these why are you giving these guys chocolate sandwiches?
Yeah, exactly. It's just pure sugar. I was an Uncrustables kid, so much like the Baltimore Ravens, I consumed a lot of Uncrustables.
I've never had a single Uncrustable.
What? That's got to change. We have a video idea. Gianna and I are going to pitch to you. All right, subscribe to the Banner Ravens podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, all those good places, and write us a review. That would be very much appreciated. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. And who knows, we might be on Blue Sky in a week. Who's to say? The way things are going. We will be back Sunday evening, late afternoon, to recap the Ravens and the Steelers. Should be a good one. Ravens have a chance to take over the lead in the AFC North. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano, and we will catch you next time.